so great to meet you.
Here we are, from screens to scream dreams.
I just want to give you a sense of what this conversation is about, like why I'm having
Yeah,
this conversation over and over again with people. I'm an artist. I've been an artist all my life since I was born, basically. It's how I came into the world. And a lot of that came really naturally to me. Intuition, especially. Like I have this superpower with just knowing stuff. And I spent a lot of time as a jeweler and I never had to measure anything because I just know things. And I
yeah.
thought that came really easily to everybody. And it didn't. I also found out that I have a condition called aphantasia where my mind's eye is blind. I can't actually visualize. When I close my eyes, I don't see anything. It's just always been black in there. I also thought that's how everybody was. I didn't know you could see.
I didn't even know that was. Wow. Okay,
I didn't
that's
even
new.
know. I didn't even know that the way you see the world in your mind is possible. And I think we're just starting
Hmm.
to have this sort of collective conversation where we realize like there's so
Yeah,
many different ways of being a human and
yeah,
seeing, and
yeah,
we're all wired
yeah,
so differently.
yeah.
And but anyway, my experience with being an artist, it was a choiceless choice. Like I couldn't do anything else. I wouldn't survive this world if I wasn't an artist. Ended up
I'm sighing. I'm sighing from that's a beautiful statement. Kate, I feel like I'm going to take so many notes on this conversation. This is like the pep talk I needed right now. Okay, keep
I'm
going.
so
I love
glad.
it.
Okay. I had a very traumatic childhood. So there's a lot of abuse and chaos and violence and drugs
Mm,
and addiction. And
mm,
I came into the world in a very chaotic way, this very
yeah.
sensitive soul, finely tuned for intuition and creativity. And I was on my own with it from a very young age, which has
Mm,
been the most blessing anybody could ever ask for because it formed me in that crucible. It formed me into this person that I am today, which I wouldn't trade for the world. But
yeah.
years and years of being in a professional setting where people would come up to me at shows or in galleries or wherever I was with my work. And there would be this moment where people would go, "Oh, you're an artist? I wish I
uh,
could do that. I wish I
Yeah.
had that in me."
Yeah.
And I say this over and over again. I explain this to almost every guest, like that moment that led me to this, because for years I had this guilt that I had this thing that these people all wanted. And it made me feel like I shouldn't have this thing. Like it bothered me for so long. And I sat with it long enough to realize that wish was actually creativity trying to talk to that person saying, let me out. Like you do have me in you. You are the artist you want to be. Otherwise, you wouldn't give a shit. You wouldn't be yearning for
Mm,
me. I
yeah.
had this moment one day where I was walking down the street and I heard that voice that I know you've heard before because we've all had it, and it said, "And now you'll start a podcast." And it was almost comical the way it came in. And I was like, what? Hell no. But I'm an introvert and I came from a family of broadcasters and it's a really dysfunctional world and I had wanted nothing to do with it. But I know that voice and I know what happens to me when I don't listen to that voice. And so I knew I
Yeah.
had to do this thing. So I started this
Yeah.
podcast, not even really knowing what it was. But when I sat with it long enough going, okay, voice, you want me to start a podcast? What is it? What do I even have to offer? I don't have anything to offer. I have a broken brain that can't see things. And I'm an artist who's barely scraping it by. And I'm a single mom. And what could I possibly offer?
Yeah.
And then I realized that it was about this. We're glitching. Humanity is glitching. That's the tagline of the podcast because we are systematically taught to shove down, suppress, lower, strangle creativity. That creativity is the intelligence that's animating the entire universe. It's the thing that tells the molecules in a rock how to stay in the shape of a rock and a tomato seed when it's time to sprout, and you how to write a poem, and me how to send the painting out. All it's everything, and we have taught ourselves how to cut ourselves off from it, and then we're yearning. And then there's those people at the market who are like, "Oh, I wish I had that." No, we do.
Yeah.
I hope that somebody listening to this conversation hears something that they need to hear so that they can wake up to that part of themselves and realize it's not something they have to go on a big, long journey or pay thousands of dollars in therapy to rediscover or find or fix,
Yeah.
or it is already here. You came in with it. It in its current state, it's already perfect, and reminding you how to find it.
I love it.
Yeah.
Do you think everybody is invited to be a creative though?
So my definition of creativity is that it's the intelligence that's animating the universe. You could call that God, you could call it the universe, you could call it, but it's the thing, it's the invisible life force that's infinitely intelligent, that is brutal, like kind of doesn't give a shit whether it runs over you or not, and its need to express itself, right? It's just like life has to life. Growth has to grow.
Yeah,
Creativity
yeah,
has to
yeah,
create. And yes, we all have it. No,
yeah,
I don't think we're all artists.
yeah.
And I think and I've thought about this a lot too, and I'm glad you brought it up. I think as artists, we are stewards of that energy in a different way. I think that's where mastery comes in. I think practice, discipline,
Yeah.
all kinds of
Yeah.
things we can talk about that honor that energy.
Hmm.
But no, we're not all here for the same thing. Like for
Yeah.
sure not.
Yeah.
For sure
Yeah.
not. But we all have
Yeah.
access to that thing.
I'm there with you. I think not everybody's invited to be a vocational artist, nor should they be, because we need people to like take care of electrical systems and kinds of
Yeah.
things like
Oh
that.
yeah.
But, the way that I define it is I'm an artist because I'm a haunted person. Like things come to me and they're like, make me. And I'm like, I can't, I'm driving right now. Like,
Yeah.
I'll get in an accident. They're like, make me or we'll go away. And I'm like, no, don't go away. Okay, hold on. I'm pulling over and I'm pulling out my sketch pad and I'm trying to release the haunting. I, but my parents, my wife, they're not haunted like I'm haunted.
No.
And I'm not saying that makes me better. It's just, the choiceless choice is such a great word.
Yeah.
And it's such a great phrase. It's just, and partly because I feel like I'm 47 and at this time of your life, there's a lot of conversations with my peers that on like, should I change my job?
Mm.
Am I doing the right thing? Can this go for 20 more years or however long? Is there a future with this? And I've 10 years, I've been a creative my whole life, but 10 years vocationally and just going, what else would I do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can't work for anyone else now at this point.
I think those skills could translate to another company and stuff, but I just, and that's all learned stuff. Everything's learnable, but yeah, it's that kind of what happens to the haunting if I
Okay,
wasn't
so I
making,
want to talk about that. I definitely want to go back to haunted, but I want to make sure that our listeners know a little bit about you. You call yourself as a curator of awesomeness, which I also want to touch on. I think that's amazing. But just tell us about your work in the world. You write and you make art and you have perform. Can you give us a picture of what that looks like?
yeah, if I was to break down my work in like this three categories that kind of help me make sense of it, which is one, I'm a painter illustrator. So trying to visualize, illustrate concept ideas, things like that, through my iPad and digital stuff to actual paint on canvas. Then second is I've made 4 books. My 5th book comes out next year and I hope to continue as long as I can. I love books and I'd love to be able to make books the rest of my life. And then lastly, I'm a public speaker. I've had 2 one-man shows that I've toured and I get hired to speak at things. Sometimes I view myself more as a performing artist than I do like just a visual artist, more of a meaning oriented artist than a medium oriented artist. For me, it's more of what's the concept or the idea that I want to go through the transformation of? And then what's the best way to translate that? Is it a book? Is it a talk? Is it a comedy routine? Is it a series of posters? Is it a tattoo, flash sheet? Whatever it is. And I have a bunch of things planned or like, I'm in a weird, I'm really glad we're talking today because I hope to get a bit of a soul pep talk from you as much as I can give back because I finished 2 really long projects. I made this one person show called Say Yes, a liturgy of not giving up on ourselves. And I toured that for 5 years, made a book into it. I filmed it. It's on YouTube, but I knew I needed to end it because I needed to like make space for the next thing, which I don't fully know what that
Mm.
is. So I'm in that kind of in between in the start where you just have a vague idea, but you're like, I'm not going to book any shows. I don't even know what I'm talking about. And then I finished a book project that was like 6 months. And so just in this, I'm probably a little tired and I'm in this ramping up to the next thing, but I don't know what it is. So this kind of weird liminal space. I think throughout our lives, we go through cyclical moments of humiliation, not meaning ending up on America's Funniest Home Videos or something like that, but more of the this the necessary dissolving of your ego so that you can enter in. Because the only way to enter into whatever the voice, the muse wants to give us is through the doorway of humility. And so there needs to be a necessary humiliation
Mm-hmm.
to prepare you for
Mm-hmm.
that. And
Mm.
so I'm in the very unsexy path of humiliation currently.
Because you don't know what's next?
I have ideas of what's next. It's more of, I think it's finding the place from within myself to be in the conversation of what's next. So let's say this next like show or talk, I've been spending some time to just really listen, prayer, meditation, a lot of walks, and I just sensed the voice say to me, you need to lay down whatever you think you're supposed to do next, or whatever you think is it's supposed to look like, or what it's supposed to be about. You need to just let all of that die and trust the process that you're being taken, just like it's happened before. Just let it, just go through the process, and you will be given everything you need to accomplish what you've been asked to do, which is a prayer that I have. You will be given everything you need to accomplish what you've been asked. That's something I got from the voice a long time ago, and I come back to it often.
I think a lot of people who are listening can identify with what you're saying. And I
Mm-hmm.
know I can. Like, I often feel like I'm asking and I'm listening so carefully. And I'm like, I hear crickets. I'm like, come on, what do you want me to be doing? Use me. Like, I'm like, use me. I want to be in service so badly. Use me. And I
Yeah.
don't. And then I look at my life and I'm like, what are you trying to tell? None of this makes sense. I'm looking at the clues of like, this is taken off, but this isn't, and this isn't. And then this took off amazingly and now it's stalled out. What are you trying
Yeah.
to tell me? I guess like you're pointing at your own version of that. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you navigate that so that you don't become just like a person who's, I'm just waiting for the muse to talk to me. I guess my wife will support us for now. You still have to be in the world and do stuff. How do you
That's
navigate?
that is happening. My wife is, we're
Sure.
fine.
Yeah.
Like,
But you
we're
know what I'm
okay.
saying? Like you can't, and sometimes you do need to lean on your person or your world or whatever and just trust the
Yeah.
universe itself even. But I guess what I'm pointing at is that ego part can get so sneaky as we go further along. And
Yeah.
it can actually, you start to approach something that's really deep and really meaningful and really real. And that part of you is really scared and is, no, I got to do everything I can to stop this guy from giving himself to this bigger thing, this service, this thing that he's really being asked to do. Because it's scary, it's unknown. I don't like the unknown. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to make it seem like, oh, you should have answers or you should have this. Or I'm going to make it seem like he should do nothing. Like it's such a trickster. How do you know what to
Yeah.
listen to in
Yeah.
there? How do you know what to listen to in there?
Yeah. I have a long list of things to do. So I have little accomplishables. I think there's a number of things. One is, and I got this from my friend Chase Reeves, but just like ride the wave you're already on.
Mm.
So it's not like I have nothing and zero. It's like there are some things. There's like a list of illustrations. There's like things I got to do on my website. There's things to do. I think fostering curiosity and paying attention to where I feel like I'm coming alive,
Mhm.
like the things that bring me to life, and spend time with that and fostering that kind of energy is important. Like what is energy? I keep coming back to these same stories. And I'm like, there's something in these stories that are making me really energized. There's life there. So spend time where the life is. And so, because sometimes this is what happens is you can get, if we imagine like a path that you're walking down, this is like when you write like a speech or a talk or something, you can you usually start with an idea you're excited about, and then you just start, and you get so far into it that you're just like, I hate this talk now. I don't even want to do this talk. And you need to like back yourself up to where you were, like the energy was, and go, what was the energy that I was so excited about? Because now I'm way stuck in the details of, I think I should do it this where it needs to. So come back to where the energy, it's like, keep the energy. And I think you can do that in your life too. It's like you can get into your title or what you think your job is or what you think you're supposed to be doing and go, well, like, when was the last time I really felt energized and alive? And what was that about? And why am I not spending time there? And how could I maybe spend a little bit of time with that today? Admits, you get it, like the dishes and the laundry. I have this little tiny yellow notebook that I can keep in my pocket. And it's where I collect all the hauntings that we'll come back to in a second. My friend and I were sitting just over here talking. And I was like, when I get in these kind of stages where I don't quite know what to do yet, I have a default awful things I say to myself. They just come up, which is like, I don't have anything to say. I'm actually not talented. Whatever. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to write the exact opposite of all those things I say. And just every day I'm going to look at these and say something different. So here's so it says different mantras. What would I say differently? I have something to say. I'm good at what I do. It's worth showing up for. It's not all up to me, and I have help.
Oh.
And so I have just been like saying these every day to counter whatever neurological rut that I easily get stuck in. And so with the writing of a new show or writing of a new thing, I figured out a while ago that creativity is really embodied. And so I'll have notes and things and collect ideas, but then I'll go on a really long walk with my notebook and just let my body help me work it out. And so on Fridays, typically I've just been like, get the kids in school. And then I just go down to the riverfront and I go on a long walk. And I've just been starting from the premise. Actually, I have something to say. Because at post 5 years of building something, one of the common things that I've heard from comedians or actors or anybody is just like, was that the last, will I ever make anything like that again? Was that the last, was that it?
Yeah.
Did I say everything I had to say?
Yeah.
And so I've just been purposefully ignoring that and going, I have something to say. I have more to say. And that has been a generative. It's like a workout. It is like a bit of a workout. It is. It feels counterintuitive at times. It feels like this, but it forces me to get into it, which is what I want to do.
I feel like I've had experiences where I haven't wanted to even open up what my next thing is because I'm scared that it will be my last thing. And what if that's it? And so then I don't even want to open it. I want to save it for later. Like how you save your favorite bite for the last on the plate or something. Like it's so made up. Like it's so not true.
Yeah. And maybe, but that's why I think that voice was saying, you need to let whatever you think you're supposed to do die because something will come, but you need to have a space for that. One of the things that happened last week was I was like, oh, my last 2 shows were about something that happened to me that then I wanted to talk about and make it into a weird, magical way. I don't know if anything's like really been to me, like massively significant. Like I got in a car accident and I almost died and I survived and now I'm sorry. So but a note that I got was like, what if the next thing you make is really about, it's not necessarily talking about something that happened to you, but it's, I find myself at this place and I want to move forward and I wanted to make this thing so I could help myself do that. And I needed all of you to do that with me. And so, because what I've been from performing the last few years, I'm really fascinating what's always hidden in the room, hiding out in the audience, collectively, the stories and the experiences and stuff. And I was like, maybe the next thing is less you carrying the narrative, and maybe it's more excavating from the audience. And maybe it's really allowing people to speak into that and then curating that, holding the guardrails for a show to make sure it doesn't completely suck. But
Right.
but go, what would it be like to not have to be the person who's, can you believe that thing that happened to me? Oh my, it's more of what happened to all of you. And so just even being open to that. And then a friend of mine who, and this happened with the last show, because the last show was very different from the one before. And I remember talking to him, he was in a band for a long time that was really successful. And he was like, when we get into the studio and we get all in our heads about, this has to be the album. This has to be the one that's good. And in order to allow ourselves into the creative process, we just go, this is the album before the album. We have to get through this one. This is the record before the record. We have to get through this one to get to the one. And so he was like, when you're putting this together, maybe this is the show before the show.
Mm.
He's like, maybe this isn't the show, but the next is, but you have to do this show to get to the next one. And so and maybe you just do it 10 times. Maybe you do it 100 times. You don't know. It's just the show. Just let it be whatever it wants to be. And so I'm bringing that to this process as well, which is just, maybe you need to do a PowerPoint talk. Maybe you need to, like, who knows what you need to go through, but maybe it's okay if what it is, you're just pretty good at making sure you don't want it to be boring. You know how to entertain an audience, you know how to make something interesting. So just do
And I
the show
think that
before the
that's
show. I think I might call it the show before the show.
the show before the show. Oh, that's a good one. I like it.
Yeah. And I hate saying that aloud because then somebody's going to buy that URL and
I
then
can
charge
cut it
me
out.
for it.
Okay.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay. Oh
One
my
of
God.
one of my uh, one of my readings in the last year, both people said, "Hey, watch out when you're sharing your ideas."
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I
Both said it. Both
yeah.
readings, they were like, "Watch out sharing your ideas."
Yeah. I think that yes. And it reminds me of what I had when my babies were first born, and I wouldn't let anybody hold them for the first 2 months. And my in-laws were really choked. And I was like, sorry, but I'm not just gonna hand this baby around the party. It's not ready yet. It's not ready yet.
Mm,
So sometimes your
that's
baby isn't ready to be handed around the party
yeah.
yet.
It's your baby. Isn't it? That's such a great line. Just
Write it down.
bangers today, Kate.
The image that I felt when you were sharing just now was the nut of the creative process. That is the rub of it, is that you get this gift comes through you and it's yours to express, and your job, your mission, your challenge is to figure out how the heck is that supposed to happen. And you can't, if you're truly doing it, you can't do it based on looking through the filing cabinet of what you did before to make up the new thing. Like, you're always on
Yeah.
the edge of the new thing.
Yeah.
You're never going to get to a place where oh, now this is what it's going to look like. It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Always that surrender has to be hand in hand with the gift that's coming through you, but you don't get to know what it looks like. And I find that extremely frustrating. As a somewhat of a control freak, maybe type A person, I want to know how it's going to look. And
Yeah.
somebody who went through trauma, never mind, let's have a kinder lens on that. Somebody who went through trauma, it's very comforting for me to have some idea of what comes next.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like you're saying, to really receive a gift, you do have to be like hands open.
And look, if we get into like spiritual and mystical talk, the structure I was given was a Christocentric structure, and that still works for me in a lot of ways, but my beliefs are not on brand with the like Christianity of America and things like that.
Yeah.
But so when I say this, but we can just say the voice, like I felt called by a voice to be a vocational artist.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been a very tempered and vulnerable and wonderful journey. It's mostly been a thrifty journey, but in the last few years, my wife and I's businesses have worked out. So here's a couple things that have come up in this season is one, I didn't have hardly any work all summer long, no paychecks. And it triggers this learned for year after year of just, am I going to get, is there money? Is pay, it was 8 years ago, we were on food stamps. Over the last few months, that's been really hard for me. And I've had to pay attention to that. And my wife, she's, we're fine. We're not, we're okay. And so I've been trying to go, okay, what is being okay? But it's this workaholism, or I have to keep producing. When you're self-employed, you're like, I just have to keep producing. I have to keep producing to keep this going. And so I'm having to detox painfully with that. Also, I vulnerably, and we're buddies now, but like I have some really hard self-contempt that comes up, and I'm able to push it down through productivity. But when I'm not being productive, it fucking comes up. And I'm going to therapy next week, and I'm talking to another person today. And I'm just like, I have to work through, I have to, when I say process, I believe benevolence sees the scope of my life. And so it's not just concerned about what kind of drawings I'm going to make. It's like the process is, now it's time to really deal with this one. Now it's time for you to uh, deal with your, you know, fear in what is the Mary Oliver poem? I don't know what prayer is, but I know how to lay down in the grass to be idle and blessed. Like, maybe I need to learn how to be idle and blessed. And that is part of the process. So that's what I'm trying to pay attention to amidst 3 kids and childcare and life and rent and all that. You know what I'm saying? My show was, it was my off. I wanted to make a ceremony about suicide, like a church service about suicide, because I'd never been to one. But I've definitely been to like church services that were so boring that I was so bored to death. And that joke made me go, oh, you have to make like a weird comedy about it. I just started taking my own notes from my own suicidal ideation. And I was about taking those things, then translating them into something entertaining. And then Anthony Bourdain killed himself. And then I was like, oh, Anthony Bourdain, he was hoping what you'd turn out to be one day. Like he had if I was really honest, it was like, oh, I hope I can be myself unabashedly and it lead me to success and travel. And I was like, he didn't even want to be himself either. So I was like, oh shit, I have to make something that's about reminding myself that that doesn't keep you around. What keeps you around? So I had to make the thing to have the conversation with myself and then bring others in it. So I'm just, what's the conversation now? And I think it has to do about paradox. I think it has to do about change. I think it has to be about what we're turning into and why it's hard to change and but we also want to change. That's kind of, how do you turn your pain and how do you take your pain and turn it into something? What's the alchemic way of doing that? And I think the clues I'm getting from the universe are like, yeah, that's what you should try to put together. Because I was at this show in Portland, my friend was playing in town, and I ran into some people who like my work, and we were talking, and one guy was a therapist, and he was just like, oh, I'm always trying to help people like turn their pain into something. And I was like, man, that's like the idea for my next show. I was like, I feel like that's our lives are not just like compartmentalized and like, here's work and personal. It's like, at least for the creative, oh no, like part of creativity is therapy and wound healing and noticing and yeah.
shitty, grungy, that healing journey. I know there's a lot of Instagram clouds and mist and mountains and trees and healing journey. That's not the healing journey. The healing journey is like heartbroken grief. You talk about the overwhelming voice of giving up and learning how to sit with those things rather than shoving them down through all the ways that you've learned how to.
Yeah.
That's the healing journey. And it isn't pretty. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
But it isn't pretty.
I don't mean this as like a punishment for not being good during your life, but the healing journey is going into the underworld. If we look at the path of how people become healers in the community, it's it always starts with a descent into the underworld hell where you're dissolved. A caterpillar being prepared to be a butterfly. You need to be dissolved, which is your illusions need to be dissolved. Your ego needs to be dissolved. And you need to be cut up into pieces and thrown in a vat. And who you think you are and what you think reality is needs to be destroyed. Because then a power greater than you will put you back together into something new. And you'll briefly ascend to the heavens where you'll see briefly the ecstasy of something greater. And then you'll find yourself back in your life going, there's something different about me. And I can't go back to what I was. And I don't know how to be that thing, but it gives me a direction. And then that's how you translate that experience into something that becomes healing for others. That's the process I want to talk about.
I'm hoping you'll tell me a little bit about the haunting, the hauntedness.
The hauntedness.
Because I think it's an interesting choice of word. Because when I think of how I've had moments where I know, and I wasn't raised in a particularly religious, I had a hard time even saying God for a long time because I thought it belonged to a community that wasn't mine. But I've had several moments that I could count probably on one hand where I have heard the voice of God. Like I heard.
Yeah.
And I also had many more smaller ones where I felt it in the room with me. And it's not something I can summon where I'm like, hey, I want to talk to God right now and I need to know, I need some answers. It's not like a thing I can control, but it's definitely something, a real presence. It brings me to my knees. Like tears are coming out of my eyes and there's this love that I have for this thing and I want to give myself to it and I want to hear it. And I wouldn't say the word haunted. It wouldn't. So it's interesting to me that you're using that word and I wanted to know more about that.
It's also love. Listening to the voice of God, a pronoun trying to describe a mystery we can't understand, is also listening to the voice of love. So I don't say God that often. I say almighty, divine. My favorite pronoun is giver.
Oh,
that's my pet name. If I have a pet name for the divine, the giver. The haunting is, I don't know what my kids will go to therapy about. It might just be like, yeah, my dad was always just looking into space while we were doing other things. That's what like. The haunting is like this thing that like impregnates in my imagination. And then it's something's being birthed and I can't get rid of it while I'm at a soccer practice. Like it's just a kind of, it's there. It's like a spirit floating around. And sometimes it's really fucking annoying. I wish I could just like turn it off and watch Wheel of Fortune or something. It's like yeah. And I don't know if that's just like my particular personality or upbringing or whatever, but here's what I've made amends with. And I think I said this earlier, is like my parents and my wife aren't haunted. Like they're not invited to the same dance I'm invited to. And I think saying yes to the haunting is just going, I realize, and I really, it wasn't like I jumped in and I was just like, I'm an artist. Actually, like realizing I was an artist was like a kind of a disappointing moment for me.
What did you want to be?
I was like 27 and I was an art teacher at a high school. And I was just starting to date my wife now. But I remember just having this, it's far too long of a story, but I went to New York City where my friends were going to art school and I met a bunch of people. I met Glenn Hansard of the Frames, who I have a poster over there, who encouraged me to be an artist. And all this, and I just was like, oh, I just remember sitting at this coffee shop in Seattle, which we all back in the 90s. And just going, the way that I should live my life is to probably spend my life doing the things I'm best at. And at the time I was like, I was a horrible painter. And I don't even think I'm a good painter now. I was like, I think the best thing I should be doing is making art. And that seems, that's disappointing. Meaning, like, all my friends are doing really important work in the world. They're like teachers and administrators and nonprofit starters. And I'm just supposed to be in a room with my emotions going, I feel, And my analogy in that moment was there was this cartoon in the 90s, 2000s called Captain Planet. And it was this like environmental propaganda cartoon for children, which was the earth spirit Gaia realized the planet was being polluted. So she gave out these 5 power rings to teenagers to fight polluters on the planet. And if they, do you know this one? And
I think so.
if they couldn't beat them, they could combine their powers and it'd make this guy Captain Planet.
Oh my God.
And he had green hair and he was blue. And if oil was leaking out, he'd do a tornado and the oil would go back in the ground. Everything would be clean again. There's these 5 rings, 5 powers, and it's earth, wind, fire, and water, which are very strong. And then the 5th one was it was the heart ring. And his name was Mati, because Mati had the heart ring, which his power was to instill caring and sympathy for people in the world to care for the planet. So what I imagined being called to be an artist, I was like, oh, it's like everybody else got really powerful things, like good and evil's duking it out. And I'm that one guy standing in the midst going, I just want you to feel. I just want you to care. And I was like, that sounds like the person who's going to get their butt kicked in a fight. But I remember just in that coffee shop going, okay, if this is what you want me to receive, I'll do it. But if at the end of my life, if I'm held accountable or judged for this moment, it's not my fault. It's your fault. Because I don't know if I would have chosen this. But I was like, show me what I'm supposed to do with it. And my summary is guns and money and bombs will change the world. Yeah. But really, to change things in the world, you need to know the conversation of a human heart. And to be an artist is to become familiar with the conversation of a human heart. That's how I see being an artist.
I love that.
Because
I think it is. It feels to me like it is the gateway. Like all these other things to me, not to diminish all the other rings and the other powers in the world, but to me, without the heart, that's all rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah.
There's no point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you what your 2 things, what your relationship is like with the giver. Do you have an ongoing conversation? Do you talk to each other? Do you talk back? How do you feel about it? Are you scared of it? What is your relationship to it? How are you constellated in your own mind's eye about with it? And then how does it speak to you? Can you hear it regularly when you're going to it for guidance, or how does it show up for you?
Kate, great question right now. I hope to be like Elizabeth Gilbert one day. Are you familiar with Elizabeth Gilbert?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I've been doing her love letters because that actually has been a real helpful conduit to hear the voice correctly. I was institutionalized in a religion that gave me a lot of, this is what the voice sounds like. And I'm still weeding some of that stuff out. I will say what gets mixed into the cement, when it hardens, it's very hard to get out. And when you are young, that is your cement being mixed. And then when you hit adulthood, it hardens and it's very hard to get all that stuff out. So I think there's still a conflict at times of what I intuit, what I know the voice to be like versus what I was institutionalized to be the voice. Right. So I've found myself like angry at times and lately distrustful. I think there's still a bit of, I don't know, like existence is wonderful and awful at the same time. Oh, and so it's hard to just go, oh, the divine is good when I'm like, there's a lot to say you're not. And so it's more of a wrestle and a frustrated conversation. My friend Levi, he's a poet. He told me, he was like, I was just on this walk and I just was like, God, fuck you, love you. And he's like, I just said that over and over again. And I was like, that sounds like one of the Psalms, dude. And I was like, I think that's, I think that's a pretty good summary of what it feels like to be a human and to even want to make space for a place of that. But like, here's what I come back to is I don't know. For one, all right, God is an endlessly knowable mystery. And so I don't, there's oftentimes where I'm like, I don't even know where to start. But there are places that have never closed in me that lead me to some kind of, I have to make space for this in my life. One is gratitude just is always an open door of joy and mystery. So mystery too, there's so many things like we just don't even know what it is. Even our consciousness, even what we are. We don't know what we are. And still for 10,000 years, we don't know what we are. But women and men have been writing and poeticizing and discussing this forever. And we can partake in that same tradition. Beauty is a place too, because there are some things in the world that you just witnessed. I, I don't know what that did to me, but whatever that is, I want more of that. So there's these, you know what I'm saying? There's these experiences and these things, aspects of life that that don't allow me to close off the conversation with the divine. And so I try to find I'm trying to find the places and materials and practices that allow me to, or help me get into a good thing. But there are days where I think I'm mad and I'm sad. I don't know. And we're allowed to grieve. But it's funny because because I write through kind of a Christian lens, the algorithm gives me a lot of people in that. And then I find myself in some arguments. Not really. I want to have those arguments, but people will counter. And I've been like this one guy in my show, I say love, and I'm pointing to like God. I'm like, love wants to pour itself out into you, but you can't receive love if you secretly hate who love made you. Because you are the only container that you can receive love in. And if all you're trying to do every day is trade that out, and this is a whole conversation about comparison, I was like, love always falls flat. And I had some guy was like, yeah, God is love, but love is not God. And,
Oh,
and I'm just like,
okay.
what does that even mean?
Yeah.
And who told you that?
Yeah.
Like, because a lot of people, at least in the tradition I grew up in, they want to talk about a book and how they interpreted the book. And I'm like, oh, the book is never meant to be opaque. The book just points to an experience. And I said to him, I was like, hey, look, I've met God. I really have. And God was nothing but love. And the same experience with love is God. So I'm comfortable saying that. And I don't need to argue with you because
Mhm.
I was like, maybe your response is you don't know what you're talking about because you deeply want to know what that experience is.
Yeah.
And you probably were told by some more controlling institution, like, this is how we need to think about things versus your own experience. Well, what's your experience? That's
Yeah.
like what I'm always like, don't tell me what somebody else told you. What about you?
Yeah.
What did you
What
experience?
do you know? Because for me,
What do you know?
knowing is so powerful and
Yeah.
scary. Have you ever felt like in your meditations and your curiosities and you're dipping your toe into the mystery of it all, have you ever felt like you're approaching something that's scary? Is it scary? Like that love? Like to me, I feel like I approached a level of that love that is just so enormous that I find it terrifying. Like little
Yeah.
Kate. There's little Kate and there's big Kate, spiritual Kate and little human Kate, ego Kate. And little human ego Kate is like really scared of the mystery and
Yeah.
of the answers. I'm yearning, my being is yearning to go back into that love that I know I am, but I'm also like, but it's too big. What will happen to me? I won't exist anymore. And then so I shut it off. And actually, I wanted to talk to you about what happens for the people who are surrendering to the voices that are not necessarily healthy negative talk and who are, it is too late and it is, I don't have it in me, and or this existential crisis is, how do you navigate that stuff? How do
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
hold both of those? How do you
Oh, I think if anything with age, it's the invitation to know your smallness.
Mhm.
And it's another path of humiliation, but it can be, it's supposed to be freeing. It's what leaves you to be like, I don't care anymore, but not in like the, I'm mad and I don't care. That's my
But
defense
that's what I
mechanism. It
mean. Like,
is,
how do you surrender without not caring anymore? How do you surrender without giving up?
yeah, I have some notes and I'm also still in the midst of that too. I do think that, and this is maybe a thing we say to ourselves to comfort ourselves, but death is the final blow to our belief that we're separate from everything else. We need to go through that in order that we can live in connection, whatever's past that. So one of our main obstacles or things that we're always overcoming and that the voice of love brings us into is like the illusion of separateness.
Mhm.
And sacredness is really finding connection. And that's why I believe in art making and in speech making and in joke making, because I think it is a liturgy of solidarity. And it is a very sacred act in that. Now, our particular incarnation is going to give a particular solidarity. And so the work, because what comparison does, and we live in a culture of comparison now, massive culture of comparison, and it's literally killing us. But this is good. This is like I'm writing the show right now. It is taking your life and making something out of it is the act of creating sacred solidarity. And it's what you've been through, what you've seen, what you think is interesting, what you think is funny, what you think is sexy, all those stuff. That's what becomes healing. So like right now, I know that I've, I tour and people come and see me, but in Portland, there's a great storytelling community called The Moth, which is nationwide. And I've just been going to every Moth every month. And I try to write a story and I try to submit it. And so far, every story I've submitted, I've gotten called and done. And it is a really fun and humiliating process, but it's good. I have a friend who runs a comedy show in LA and he was like, hey man, I got a slot for 10 minutes. I'm spending my own money to fly down to LA on Friday to do 10 minutes of comedy because it's like my dream to do stand up. And I don't expect it to launch my career, get me on a TV.
Mhm.
And it's just, it fans the flame of giving a shit about my life. Because I'm getting older, there are limitations because I'm a dad. I'm a parent of young kids for only a certain time of my life. And it happens to coincide with at the time of my life where you tend to be most successful. So I feel this tension and juxtaposition, but I don't want to give up on my dreams and aspirations because that is a sour gift I would give to my kids if they thought like they stood in the way of me trying. So I have to work that tension out. I'm often like, what is it that you really want to do? And then here's a trick. And can you be flexible with how you define that? So I never was in a band. I never played in a band and I never did a concert. So is that not accomplishable? I have a friend who's just playing with other people in their 40s and 50s in their garage in their neighborhood. I've been like, how would you define a band? How would you define a concert?
Mhm.
Because if you're willing to, if it's got to be like at the Coliseum with this many people and this many instruments, I don't know. But if it could be like recorded tracks with a group of your friends and you got some lights and you made up a thing just for the fun of it, just try. It's how do you want to define it? So I'm trying to get really in touch with the things that I feel like I missed out on or whatever and go, how would we work this? So I don't think I'll be a nationwide touring comedian, but it's cool to do 10 minutes in the thing in LA or that kind of stuff. But I feel also the despair of not being able to do something, and then makes me want to watch Netflix and give up and stuff. So I fight against it. So it's really, what is the desire here? And do I really want it? And then how would I play with that and then set something to push that? That's like what I'm working through. But yeah, I think one of the hard things in our society right now is we're really privy to all kinds of human lives, how they've unfolded. And some have had spectacular successes, but at what other cost? I'm very skeptical of only seeing one side of people's public lives, because I see a lot of people who are my age who have a lot of money and their life looks very glamorous and stuff like that. But I'm with my kids every day. Unless I'm on a trip, I'm around. And I'm not saying the actor Ryan Reynolds isn't around, and we're the same age. I'm not saying he's not around his kids, but I don't know. I think when you're making a movie, you probably don't see your kids very much.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I, there's people I know who, like, their relationships fell out, or they had to, I don't know. I think it's just, what is it that you really want? What do you really want out
And
of
coming back
your,
to that gratitude piece, like what is actually here? Because I struggle with that. I've often felt like
mm-hmm.
from a very young age, I had this feeling like I was supposed to be like serving a lot of people, like that millions of people would know who I was and I would be really helping. And
Yeah,
who knows where that came from? Maybe there's some divine in that and it's still on my path and it's coming. Or
yeah,
maybe that was just
yeah,
like some sort of ego way of helping me survive. Who knows? Like I actually won't
yeah,
know,
absolutely.
right? I won't know.
The depth and complexity of people is
Yeah.
immense. Yeah.
But I have always, it has felt like, I guess if I was going to put words to it, I've always felt like I was made for more than what
Mm,
appear to be doing right now. And that has
yeah,
caused me a lot of discord in my body, right? Like I want to resolve
yeah,
that.
yeah,
And so I
yeah,
I'm looking for things. But then I also have kids who are school age and there's a whole bunch of grief and joy that goes with that too, right? On a day-to-day basis of wanting to be here so that,
yeah,
because I know it's fleeting. I know it's all happening so quickly and I want to be here for that. But I also, like you said, this is the time that I'm supposed to be building my thing and how do I,
yeah,
but what I keep coming back to is just falling in love with what is. Can I fall in love with what is, which is what you're saying, right? This is what you're doing. When you're
yeah,
going to saying yes to that opportunity in LA, saying yes to the little invitations that you're getting on your Friday morning walks. That falling in love with what is, I think, is what we miss when we are looking further afield, when we're trying to make we're we're letting ego drive the car and we're like, oh, I have to
yeah,
build the big thing. You're actually missing the big thing.
yeah,
And just reflecting back to you, like how wise that is that you are just doing those little things and saying yes to
yeah,
these things. Because from here where I sit looking at you, it's funny because it was before you even mentioned the stand-up thing. I was like, I had this little hit. I was like, this guy's supposed to be doing some kind of like Netflix comedy TV show where we're talking about feeling the feelings. And I just had
mhm,
this, I can't even articulate it. It was so fast.
yeah,
But you don't know what you're saying yes to when you say yes to you think you might just be going on a weekend to LA. It could be the thing that sets the motion, a thing in motion that doesn't seem connected. And then 2 years from now, it all comes back. We just have to keep saying yes to what feels right. Right.
I we moved to this area because I got a job at a design agency, and then I was laid off 7 months later. Their own financial problems, nothing I did wrong. And in that, oh no, I had some really strong visions of what I was supposed to do next. And I had a sense, I was like, what am I supposed to do? And I sensed God say, I want you to be quiet. And then I want you to work on this workbook that your friend had given you like 9 months ago. And it's been sitting in a drawer. And I worked on this workbook, which is like telling your own story. And there were some really profound images that came out of that. And then I was like washing dishes my first week of being unemployed. And I started having these like visions. I saw myself like kind of doing like a show. It was like interesting. And I kept getting these visions. And I was like, I think I'm supposed to be like looking at want ads to get a job, but it feels the divine is saying, I want you to write a show. And I was like, okay, I have bills to pay. So if you want me to write a show, you got to take care of. My richest friend was like, hey, I know you're in a hard spot. Here's a check, which paid for like a month. And an old employer was like, hey, do you know this rapper? And I was like, I do. And they're like, can you make a video with him and we'll pay you this much? And I was like, yep. And that paid for 2 months. So I was like, oh, bam, there it happened. And I was going to do this event in Pittsburgh, and a friend of mine there ran an art gallery, and she was like, hey, why don't you use our space and do this show there? So I did this like work job. And then in the evenings for 3 nights, I did this like one-man show in this art gallery, trying it out. And then there's so many other things where I felt like what I was being asked to do was like raise money for 6 months and be supported so then I could do this stuff without having to worry about selling tickets and stuff. And I did. I started doing shows for people in their living room in their house, for 5 people at a cafe. So when I meet people now who are like, I want to get into what you're doing, I'm like, great, get 4 people in a living room. And because the universe is just like, hold on, this guy, he wants to look, come here. He says he wants to try to do something. Let's see if he's serious.
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, wait, 5 people? You didn't give up? What if 6 come the next night? Okay. Hey, I think he's going to stick with it. Let's give him like a few more opportunities and see. The universe wants to know if you're serious. Because there's plenty of people who just are like, I want the crowd, but I don't want the place from within the place to speak to the crowd. And I had to earn that. I remember I was having dinner with this comedian I know, and he was telling me, he goes, if you're a comedian and you do your own tour and around 175 people come to your show, you're in the top 10% of working comedians in the nation. And I was like, damn, 200 people show up at my show. So I guess I'm in a top 10 comedian, top 10%. You know what I'm saying? I was like, oh, wow, this is all of a sudden happened. But I had to I had to walk the path of humiliation to go, I think I have something to say, piece it together, learn how to tour. I'm not a comedian, but like the other part for me was like, I'm not a comedian, meaning if you are a comedian, there's a network of comedy clubs set out throughout the United States and Canada, and you can put yourself in there and go around. I'm not trying to be a professional religious person, meaning there are churches and organizations, denominations that you put yourself in there and go around. I was like, I want to do comedy and spiritual. I want to do sacred moments and dick jokes. And so I was like, where do I perform? And over the last few years, I've had to find like bars and art galleries and performing art spaces, some sacred spaces, some comedy spaces, to find out where my stuff fits. And then I travel with Christmas lights, and I travel with things to decorate a room in order to make it a thing. And it's fucking hard, but I love it. At the same time, I was visiting my parents up in Seattle during Christmas last year, and I was meeting a friend for coffee like December 28th, this little town called Edmonds. And in walks a guy named David Bazan. David Bazan is a musician. He's been doing it for 20, 30 years. He's not the first person to ever do this, but he really trailblazed this idea of, if you get enough people to sign up to buy tickets, I'll come and do house shows. And he started doing these like touring of house shows around the nation. And we've met before. It had been like a decade since I've seen him, but he walks in and he's like, hey, Scott. I didn't even know he remembered my name. And I was like, hey, Dave. And he ended up sitting with us. We chatted for like 2 hours. But I had this question about like, how do I keep doing what I'm doing? I asked this question. I was like, how do I keep doing this? And then the one person who I would respect in telling me how to do this walked into a coffee shop and sat down and had coffee with me. And I remember I talked to him, and I felt so loved after this moment. I was like, you're paying attention. But I asked him, I said, hey, I gave him the scenario. It's like this. And I was like, I just want to curate the room that I want to be in. And he's just, dude, that's it. He's like, you just got to keep doing it. Just make the room you want people to be in. That's your work. And it was like the pep talk I needed at this unexpected time. Wasn't in charge of it. I just asked. I just said, I don't know how to keep doing this. I need some encouragement. And I have this question. And then the answer was so wonderful. But Kate, as I'm thinking through this, I started doing small things and I kept going. I would spend time visualizing myself performing at like a theater, because here's the other thing is sometimes you want something, but then if you get there, you're like really freaked out about it. And so I would spend time practicing the spaces I ended up wanting to be in. I would go, what would it feel like to be there? Oh, it'd feel like just how it feels now, which is I'm with myself. And do I really believe in what I'm saying and what I'm doing? What do I want to do? And how do I want to do it? And then I'd imagine leaving and getting in my car and going to a hotel room all by myself and being like, is it worth being gone? Am I just going to get drunk again in my hotel room because I'm like all by myself? Do I want to be by myself? What do I want? I want to speak, but I don't want to be alone. I had to and then I lived through these things, and those are trial and error. I've been drunk in a hotel by myself a few times out of boredom, out of trying to come down. I was just talking with a friend. I was like, what is Taylor Swift's post-show routine?
God, I can't.
What is her life like? Because 3 hours, she must burn 6,000 calories for one. I was like, how does she go to bed without getting drunk? I don't how do you come down from that? Do you go to sleep the next day at 10 a.m. to get up and do it? I was like, because my simple, humble show would knock me out the next day. And it's like learning those. Anyways, that's getting into practice and doing stuff. But you know what I'm saying? It's I think you have to just go, what is it that I really want? This is what I was getting to. Besides the visions, a little later on, I was about to turn 40 at the time. And I was like, I think I've always wanted to be a performing artist. And if I don't try to do that, I'll always regret it. And I was like, I don't even know where to start with that. I had to develop these spiritual practices, mental health practices to go, I'm on my way. I can be a contribution, and you just got to let the idea of who you think you should be die to get to what's actually happening. And those are the things and I kept reminding myself, and I would go, the timeline is a lot longer, but people won't come to see you overnight. But if you try to do something for 10 years, it would probably grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is it like to build for 10 years? It probably doesn't mean drop everything and start. It might be like you phase out your work and you start building this other thing. And so there's things like that I had to kind of practice.
It's just a journey it's really important to do that self-reflection piece around, is this something I even want to be doing? I love that you asked yourself, do I want to be out? That means I'm going to be away. It's not just the show and the crowd and the cheering. It's then the hotel room and then the being away from home. And we all have our own version of what that means. Some people might be considering leaving their job at the credit union to go and be a painter full time. Do you really want to schlep your canvases to a farmer's market tent every weekend? Think about it all.
I don't. I see that. I was like, oh, I don't want to do art shows at all.
Yeah. But and not to turn anybody off of it, but it's so important.
Yeah. What is it exactly? What is it you want from it?
Yeah. What do you? And then and you can set it up in different ways. You can set it up so you don't have to do art shows even if you want to sell your art. But you just have to think about which steps you want to take, and then take those steps, and which steps you don't want to take.
Yes. How do you take those steps?
Yeah.
And maybe it's trial and error. I'm practicing painting again. I have some paintings over here, and they're awful. And
Yay.
I'm actually going to cover them up. I'm going to cover them up for the second time and try again. Because one thing I learned, so I did have this really interesting decade of my life where I was a live painter. That's where I got Scott the Painter. Meaning I didn't grow up charismatic. I grew up Lutheran, who doesn't talk about the spirit. And yet the spirit led me to just, I would see images, and it led me to just paint images in front of people in settings, church services, concerts, conferences. So for a good decade, I was a traveling live painter. it was one of the greatest jobs I've ever had. I worked at an amazing church community in Houston, Texas, where I got to be the artist in residence at this church. I got paid money to be an artist in a community and to help the community in spiritual formation through creative practice. And nobody asked me to do this, but I made a painting every service every weekend, and 5 services a weekend. So I made a 4 foot by 3 foot painting 5 times a weekend for like 3 years. But what I learned by making the same painting 5 times is, oh, and I'll say this to artists if they want to critique, I'll be like, what would it be like if you made this painting 3 times? Because you made it once and you're like, is it good or not? It's like, I don't know. Make it 3 more times. Who says you only can make a painting once? Like the masters used to make practice paintings before they made the big paintings. I know that the practice, it's not about one time, am I good or not? It's like, no, do it 5 times. See, you don't know what your 5th version of a painting would be. I have this joke in Say Yes that I'm really proud of. It took me 90 times over like 3 years of doing that show until I found the joke.
Your voice as a painter, and I'm thinking about like visual artists, you're hitting something there with doing it more than once, because I think we do a painting once and like, okay, now I have to move on to the next thing. It has to be original. It has to be different. I could imagine your voice would emerge when you did something.
Yeah.
You'd start to see what's the common thread in all of these iterations.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's what's
Yeah.
trying to come through me. Because sometimes you can't
Yeah.
even see or hear or know what's trying to come through you because you're so close. It is you. It's in you. And it's really hard to know, to recognize it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a myth that people are just, I'm not an artist. And it's like, how do you know that?
Mm-hmm.
Being an artist is less about innate ability and more about your ability to make something greater than your innate ability. I'll give you an example. If somebody came to me right now and said, draw me a tiger, like right now, I could make a fun and whimsical, yet not anatomically correct drawing of a tiger. But if somebody said, come back in an hour with a drawing of a tiger, I know how to put together a drawing of a tiger. I know how to find source material. I know how to gather materials. I know how to do practice and setup to then orchestrate and execute a drawing of a tiger. It's not about what you can do innately. It's about learning the ability to build something bigger than what you can do innately. Very few people are really good at making a speech off the top of their heads, but all of us can work on a speech, write it and practice it and edit it and then memorize it and then do it. So everything is a learned skill. Someone says, I'm not an artist. To be an artist is to know how to make something greater than what you can do right now. And so you don't even know if you're an artist or not because you've never put yourself on that journey to do it. Yeah. Everything is a learned skill. Everything. But I think the people who become quote unquote artists are the people who are haunted by it, who won't let them go. And then they just get really focused and they go over and over again. So they make that practice a part of their daily life. And then that's how they build into it. So I think just being an artist is dedicated to the process of learning how to make something bigger than yourself.
Yeah. It's an agreeing to collaborate with that which is doing the haunting long enough to create something that wasn't just haphazard, fluky. My first one was great. My first couple of paintings were great. And then I started doing some really crappy paintings. And I was like, wait, what happened? Sometimes there's this up and down, and the commitment to going through the dark stuff too, so that the good stuff will come out later.
Yeah. I was having a real funky day.
I was going to ask you, do you feel pepped? Do you feel a bit more pepped up?
There was a few things that came together that I was like, oh, which is death is the ultimate blow to your belief that you're separate from everything else. And so that's the necessary doorway to enter into something different than what this is. But what sacredness is the invitation to that connectedness. And so the act of storytelling or taking your life and turning it into something is the sacred act of solidarity. It's using your life and experience to create connection. It's part of dissolving that separateness. And I was like, oh, that's okay. I don't know if I've heard anybody say that, but I was like, that's helpful for me in thinking like, why would we do this?
I felt it when
Yeah.
I watched that solidify for you, and I felt it.
Mhm.
So,
Cool.
yeah.
I came across this book. It's called The Death and Resurrection Show, From Shaman to Showbiz. It's out of print. You can buy a copy
Ooh.
for like $800, but I found a PDF and I printed it out and I traveled with it on airplanes and I took tons of notes. And this historian, Rogan Taylor, I don't know why it's out of print. It's the best book I've ever read in some ways. This historian, Rogan Taylor, can I tell you this? Do you got to go?
Yeah. No, tell me.
In every human civilization ever, there's always a person who emerges as the shaman, the healer in the community. It's like there's always a person that comes in the midst of the community who becomes the healer. And it's the person who has to go through this 3-tiered initiation. So one is they are given some kind of intense illness. It is physical, but it can be mental, psychological. And if we imagine a 3-tiered metaphor of existence, what I was referencing, that illness pulls them into the underworld where they are destroyed, chopped up into pieces, thrown in a vat, destroyed. And then Parker Palmer, the Quaker author, says that's where our illusions, our egos dissolve. And then a power greater than them brings them back together. They briefly experience the ecstasy of the heavens and they come back to their life. The second stage is, having gone through that process, they must apprentice themselves with somebody else who has gone through that process in order that they may figure out their own way to integrate it and express it. And even though culturally it has different expressions throughout the world, it's always the same stuff, which is you have to make your own drum, make your own beats, make your own mask, make your own vestments. Because the third way that you become, and this is how you become the healer in the community, is you put on a show. You show the community that you know the language and the conversations behind everything and the powers that are there, and you know how to manipulate it. And this person has taken many forms throughout time, from hunter-gatherers to potlatches to sweat lodges to clowns to traveling minstrel groups to magicians. And he's like, modern show business is ancient shamanism. It's putting on a death and resurrection show. Mm-hmm. It's Beyonce. It's James Taylor. It's Johnny Cash. Grew up in poor rural Arkansas. He saw his brother die in a horrible accident. He wanted to get out of there when he graduated high school. He joined the Air Force, went to Germany, hated it, wrote some songs, came back, started a band, found Sam Phillips at Sun Records, played him some songs. He was like, that's not your songs. Then he played him Folsom Prison Blues. Johnny Cash never gone to prison. Played him Folsom Prison Blues. And he's like, that's the song. And he became the Man in Black because he could pantomime his time in hell. He could speak to the ecstasy of the heavens. And he creates a death and resurrection show, a healing seance in his concerts, in his albums, and stuff like that. This book answered gave me I had a lot of questions, and it gave me like a through line on what that was. And I think where it's been leading me is going, not everybody's going to become a shaman. Not everybody's going to become a healer, because that process it's so intense. It leaves the person, that makes them an oddity. It might make them like David Bowie, but you have to ask yourself, do you want to be David Bowie? Process is something we all are going to have to go through, whether we like it or not. And as an artist, I was like, my job is to take my questions, my pain, and then turn it into something. Why do we tell stories? What is the power of storytelling? What does it do to us? And I have lots of thoughts about that. Like, what is scripture if not human beings going, I went through something and here's how I thought about it. And then by telling the story, it's helpful to our community. So I was like, it's good to know how to tell your story, because you're just doing what people have done throughout time. It's like you went through something and you're trying to make sense of it, and that becomes healing to others. You're telling your story is initiating the dissolving of the separateness that we all think that we're in. And your life, your story becomes the liturgy of solidarity. It becomes like the practice of finding the connectedness. What is a podcast is a collection of moments of solidarity. Like, it's people telling their story and then finding hope and connection, or a piece that you needed to move forward in your own life. You don't listen, you listen to a podcast, it's entertaining, but it's expanding, right? That's why I listen to people, is because like, I'm trying to find the next piece or the next step, and hearing their story helps me find my own story.
Yeah.
I've been reading some Frederick Buechner, and he goes, the reason I am even telling my story is because if I practice trying to tell my story, you might find your story in it. And it's worth doing for that. So, yeah. Sure.
At the end of every episode, I ask the billboard question. If you had this magical billboard that everybody in the world who is struggling with the list of all the negative beliefs, I don't have it in me, it's too late, I'm too old, I'm too poor, I have bad luck, well, all the collection of those stories. So this is for that person who's just really ruled by those negative beliefs. But you had this magical billboard that you could put something on, and these words would have the power to reach into their heart and help them realize that stuff wasn't true. What would you put on the billboard?
Does it have to be words?
No, you
can
can put whatever you want. Anything. It's a magical billboard.
It's a magical billboard.
Yeah.
Here's what I would do. When somebody looked at this magical billboard, and it would be a beach with the ocean. And when they looked at it in like a Harry Potter style, where like the tent is small, but inside it's big, just by looking at it, they would be able to sit on the beach and experience the entire rotation of the tides in that one instant. And in that one instant, seeing the entire movement of the tides, they would realize that everything changes. Everything eventually changes. It just goes very slow, but it's always changing. And so whatever moment you're in, whatever place in your life you're in, it's changing. And because I think for me, the biggest argument for self-destruction is this miserable place that you're in, you're never going to get out of it. And that fuels my depression most. And so it's that, but if you can see the entire scope of the tides, which takes time, like if you were to sit there, it would take 12 hours to see it. But if you could instantaneously know that experience, you're like, I can change. I'm not stuck in this. That would be my magical billboard.
I have to say that might be my favorite billboard ever. I'm not just saying that. Okay, you're amazing. I've loved this conversation so much.
Okay, that's very good. Thanks. I love it too. Let's do it again.